For 10,000 years, humanity drifted in a silent sleep, held in place by their own ambition. Long before the Great Hibernation began, people believed they had mastered everything: energy, space travel, even the patterns of life itself. They built enormous worlds in orbit, forged cities inside hollowed moons, and filled the galaxy with their bright confidence. But with every discovery, they kept reaching further, pushing limits that were never meant to be crossed. No one realized that something ancient was watching from the dark, waiting for the moment when humans would dig too deep and wake what had been resting far longer than they had existed. The story began with a simple signal. It was faint, trembling through the edges of known space, and it appeared only once before vanishing. Most systems ignored it. One research vessel did not. The crew on board believed it could be a new star forming or maybe a lost probe calling out. They had no idea their curiosity would set everything in motion. As they approached the source, they found a strange structure half buried in drifting ice. It wasn't natural and it wasn't familiar. Its surface held marks older than any human language, and every scan returned the same answer: unknown. Inside that structure, something pulsed slow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. The crew felt it through their suits, a vibration that seemed to blend with their own rhythm. No one spoke of fear, but each one felt it. Something wasn't right. When the main chamber opened on its own, releasing a soft wave of warm air, they should have turned back, but humans rarely turn back when answers are close. That heartbeat quickened, the walls lit up, the readings spiked, and then, without warning, every system in the vessel shut down. The last thing the crew saw was a shape moving in the dark, larger than anything they had studied before, rising as if waking from a long, forced rest. In the centuries that followed, humanity slowly drifted into stasis as planets fell quiet and cities powered down. Records faded and memories slipped away. All that remained were scattered fragments speaking of a sleep meant to protect humanity from the shadow they had awakened. But 10,000 years later, the cycle ends. The vaults begin to open again. People step out into a world they barely recognize, calmer, quieter, holding a strange emptiness in the air. Yet something else has awakened too. Rumors spread through the first outposts. People report strange tremors under the ground and lights that flicker even when power is stable. Some speak of a low hum coming from deep caverns, matching the rhythm of a distant heartbeat. And though no one fully remembers what happened before the long sleep, everyone senses the same thing. Whatever humanity woke all those ages ago did not disappear. It waited, it grew stronger, and now it is searching. The first explorers are preparing to investigate the old signal site once more, but none of them know what is already watching them from the shadows, waiting for their first step back into the forgotten darkness. The first explorer team moved across the quiet landscape with slow, careful steps. Their suits still smelled new, even though they had been sealed away for centuries. They were among the first to wake from the long sleep, chosen because they had once studied the old frontier zones. Even if their memories felt foggy, they recognized the land as something that used to be full of activity. Now it looked frozen in time. Broken towers leaned like forgotten bones, and long metal tracks disappeared into sand shaped by 1,000 silent years. Their leader kept glancing at the sky, as if expecting something to descend from it. The air wasn't dangerous, but it felt heavy, like it carried things unsaid. The others sensed it too. Every sound echoed longer than it should. Even their own breathing felt loud. They weren't just exploring, they were trespassing somewhere they had once been warned not to return to, though none of them clearly remembered why. As they continued, they activated small drones to scan the terrain. The drones should have flown smoothly, but each one glitched for a moment before stabilizing. The team exchanged uneasy looks. Faulty equipment was normal after 10,000 years, yet these failures felt different. It was as if something unseen was brushing against the machines, testing them, watching them. When they reached the site where the ancient signal was detected long ago, they found the ground cracked open. A faint warmth seeped out of the fissures, strange after so many centuries. One explorer knelt and felt the air rising from the crack, pulsed gently, almost matching a slow heartbeat. They all stepped back at the same time, without needing to discuss it. Nearby stood the remains of an old research outpost. Its walls were coated in dust so thick it looked like stone. Inside they found panels still flickering with a ghostly glow. The power source should have died ages ago, yet some of the screens showed fragments of recorded logs. Most were scrambled, broken into short bursts of sound. But one message repeated clearly: "Do not open the inner chamber. Something has changed. We were wrong." The team listened to that line again and again. None of them recognized the voice, but they felt the fear behind it. The message wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, almost defeated, as if the speaker already knew escape was impossible. As they searched the outpost further, they found a sealed door half buried under collapsed equipment. The metal was bent inward, not outward, as if something from inside had pushed with immense pressure. One explorer reached out to touch it, then pulled back quickly. The surface was warm. They didn't open it. They didn't even consider it. Instead, they backed away slowly, each step careful and silent. The tension around them thickened, not from danger they could see, but from the sense of something stirring below, something that had waited ages for this moment. When they stepped outside again, the wind had picked up. It carried a low hum across the plains, faint but clear enough to make every person pause. They looked at one another, then at the horizon where the shadows seemed to gather. Whatever they had woken long ago was no longer sleeping, and now it knew they had returned. Back at their temporary base, the explorers gathered around a dim table screen, studying every detail of the data they had collected. None of the readings followed normal patterns. Energy levels rose and fell as if responding to them. Deep below the cracked ground, something was shifting slow and deliberate. The team argued in low voices, trying to understand whether it was natural or something far more dangerous. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone felt the same fear spreading through the room. The ancient threat they had once awakened might be moving again. One member of the team, the quietest among them, kept replaying the message from the old outpost. The calm warning lingered in their mind. They wondered who the speaker had been, what they had seen, and why no one had ever come back to report it. Maybe people during the old era had tried to cover it up. Maybe the mass hibernation wasn't protection from time, but protection from something rising beneath them. And if that was true, then waking up might have started the same cycle all over again. Another team worked outside, trying to reconnect long-buried communication lines. Their goal was simple: reach any other newly awakened colony and confirm whether similar tremors or odd signals had been found. But every attempt to send a long-range message failed. Static filled the air, growing thicker by the hour. One technician insisted the static wasn't random. It carried a pattern, a slow rhythm that felt too steady to be noise. When they amplified it, the base lights flickered in perfect sync. By evening, the ground shook again, just enough to rattle loose dust from the support beams. The team rushed outside in time to see faint ripples moving across the surface, like waves on water. The tremors faded quickly, but they left behind a deep vibration that hummed through the explorers' boots. No one said anything. They didn't need to. The heartbeat-like rhythm they had sensed earlier was now unmistakable. Far from the base, another subplot was unfolding. A small group of recently awakened civilians had begun exploring abandoned shelters on their own. They weren't trained or authorized, but curiosity dragged them forward. They found old maps showing underground tunnels that stretched for hundreds of miles, connecting forgotten research sites. One shelter even held fragments of handwritten notes. Most were unreadable, but a few words stood out: containment, miscalculation, reactivation. The civilians didn't fully understand them, but they knew enough to feel uneasy. One of them suggested they share the notes with the explorer team. Another disagreed, afraid they would be blamed for wandering into restricted zones. They decided to keep searching first, unaware they were walking on ground that had begun to warm beneath their feet. Their footsteps echoed louder than they should have, almost as if someone or something was following the sound. Back at the main base, night settled in quietly, too quietly. The wind had stopped, and the air felt unnaturally still. The explorers kept watch in shifts, staring at the horizon where soft pulses of light flickered between distant hills. They didn't know if the lights were natural or a sign of something rising from below. Every person felt the same question tightening inside them. Was the ancient beast they had awakened truly alive, or was the land itself becoming the creature? And as the last light faded, a deep, slow thrum echoed across the plain, strong enough to shake the walls, yet quiet enough to feel like a whisper. The explorers froze, knowing the real conflict was only beginning. The thrum beneath the ground returned again before dawn, stronger than anything the explorers had felt so far. They woke instantly, some sitting upright in their bunks, others already reaching for their gear. The vibrations rolled through the soil like a distant giant shifting in its sleep. The lights flickered again, but this time they didn't stabilize. Instead, they dimmed to a soft glow, leaving the entire base wrapped in an uneasy half-darkness. Every shadow felt deeper. Every sound carried more weight. The team gathered at the central station, scanning the terrain with every sensor they had. The readings spiked wildly, showing rising energy from deep underground. Lines on the screen twisted into shapes that made no scientific sense, curves bending into each other, waves collapsing and reforming. One of the explorers whispered that it looked like something trying to push upward, like pressure building under a locked door. Another corrected them. It wasn't pressure, it was intent. Outside, the air had changed. A faint warmth drifted across the plain, rising in slow bursts, as if the ground were exhaling. The explorers stepped out and looked toward the horizon, where the flickering lights they saw the night before were growing brighter. They weren't lightning, they weren't reflections. They pulsed in rhythm with the trembling ground. The same slow heartbeat, the same ancient signal. Meanwhile, the civilians who had wandered into the underground tunnels were now deep inside old structures no one had touched for ages. The walls hummed around them, vibrating in soft, steady patterns. They didn't understand why the air felt charged, or why the tunnel lights long dead for centuries started glowing as they walked. The deeper they went, the warmer the ground became. They followed the dim path until they reached a massive chamber sealed with a curved metal gate. The surface was covered in faint markings, matching the symbols found at the original signal site. When one of them placed a hand on the gate, it responded with a slow, living pulse. The group stepped back, trembling with fear. They whispered about running back, alerting the explorers, abandoning the tunnels, but before they could decide, the pulse grew stronger. Dust from the ceiling drifted down. A long, echoing groan rolled through the chamber, like ancient machinery waking for the first time in ages. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing through the tunnels as the hum behind them rose into a low, resonant roar. Above ground, the explorer team watched as the cracks near the original site widened. Thin streams of bright light seeped through, illuminating the ground like glowing veins. Every instinct told them to retreat. Every sense warned them they were witnessing the first signs of something far larger than their base, their mission, or even their entire awakening cycle. Yet they couldn't move. Not when the tremors changed into a pattern-sharp rising pulses that formed a clear signal. Not random, not natural, a call. The drones they had launched earlier were now returning on their own, all of them drifting back without control signals. Their cameras showed the same thing, the ground splitting open in multiple areas, something luminous shifting underneath, as if stretching after a long confinement. Then the deepest tremor yet thundered through the plain, knocking several explorers to their knees. The air twisted with a low, powerful hum that vibrated through their chests. Something beneath them was rising, something they had tried to lock away for 10,000 years, and now, nothing stood between it and the surface. The ground stopped shaking for a brief moment, as if the world had paused to take a breath. The explorers held still, waiting for the next tremor, the next burst of light, the next sign that the ancient force beneath them was ready to tear through the surface. But instead of a quake, a strange silence settled across the plain. Even the wind seemed frozen. For a few seconds it almost felt peaceful. Almost then every device in the base lit up at once. Panels that had been dark for centuries flashed with symbols none of the explorers recognized. Their units buzzed with overlapping voices, scrambled and layered, like a crowd speaking from different time periods at the same moment. The main screen flickered violently before forming a single line of text. It repeated over and over, faster each time. Containment breached. Secondary awakening initiated. No one knew what secondary awakening meant, but the way the ground seemed to tense underneath them suggested it wasn't good. At that same moment, the civilians fleeing the underground tunnels reached the surface, breathless and covered in dust. They tried to speak but only fragments came out, glowing gates, shaking walls, the feeling of something waiting behind the metal. Before the explorers could calm them, the earth under the tunnel entrance collapsed with a deafening crack. A pillar of light shot upward, piercing the sky before fading into a soft shimmer. The collapse left a massive, deep pit that pulsed with warmth. And then, out of nowhere, the second twist arrived. The sky rippled. It wasn't a cloud, it wasn't smoke. It was as though the atmosphere itself folded for a second, bending around something invisible. The explorers stared upward as the ripple formed a circular distortion just for a heartbeat before vanishing. A sound followed, low and distant, like a whisper carried across miles. Not a natural noise, not wind, not machinery. It was a reply. Whatever was rising from beneath the ground wasn't alone. Something above somewhere beyond the sky responded to it. The explorers scrambled to adjust their scanners, turning them toward the upper atmosphere. The results froze the room. A massive structure, or maybe a presence, hovered just beyond visible range. Not a ship built by humans. Not anything recorded in the old archives. It appeared only as a faint outline, drifting like a shadow cast from another layer of reality. And its shape matched the ancient markings carved into the long-buried structures. The realization hit them all at once. Humanity had awakened something below, but the thing below wasn't the only one that had been waiting. There was a counterpart above, or maybe a watcher, reacting to the disturbance. The long sleep might not have been meant to protect humans from the creature underground. It might have been meant to keep both forces dormant, separated, contained. But now the barriers were breaking on both ends. Lights across the horizon flickered again, stronger and more frequent. The ground rumbled in response. The air began to vibrate as if pulled between two rising powers. The explorers looked around, uncertain whether to run, hide, or simply brace themselves for whatever came next. Panic spread through the civilians as the sky distortion reappeared bigger this time, stretching like a wound opening in the atmosphere. The stakes had escalated beyond anything they imagined. Waking one creature was already a disaster, but waking two, one below and one above, was a catastrophe waiting to happen. And as both forces stirred, the land trembled again, signaling that the true clash, the one buried in humanity's forgotten past, was finally about to return. The ground erupted before anyone could react. The fissures that had been spreading across the plains now split the earth into jagged, glowing canyons. From below, the ancient beast pushed upward, a massive shape cloaked in shifting shadows and light, its movements slow but terrifyingly deliberate. The explorers and civilians froze, unable to tear their eyes away as the creature finally emerged from the crust, towering above the tallest structures they had built. Its skin shimmered faintly with energy patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the low hum they had felt for days, each beat like the drum of inevitability. At the same time, the distortion in the sky returned, growing larger and brighter. The watchers above had descended or at least extended themselves downward, a sprawling form made of light and energy, gliding silently but with unmistakable intent. The two forces, one of shadow and one of radiance, faced each other across the scarred land. The explorers instinctively understood that this confrontation wasn't random. Something in the ancient designs of the old civilizations had meant to keep these two apart. Humanity's curiosity had broken that balance. Panic spread among the civilians, but the lead explorer shouted for calm, forcing everyone to focus. We need to understand their connection. They realized the pulses, the vibrations, the symbols, they weren't just warnings. They were signals, a form of communication meant to contain the two forces, or at least synchronize them. The explorers raced to the central terminal, feeding the collected data into the long-dormant machinery around them. Panels lit up, gears spun, and faint holographic projections of the old containment systems flickered into life. The beast below roared, shaking the ground with every movement. The upper entity responded, a shimmering wave of energy rippling across the plains. The explorers held their breath, manipulating the system as fast as they could, trying to replicate the ancient containment protocols. The air shimmered with tension, charged with the energy of forces far beyond human comprehension. Then, at the same moment, both entities paused. A perfect, terrifying silence fell, broken only by the synchronized thrum that now pulsed in unison. With one final input, the explorers activated the containment matrix. A wave of light spread from the base, cascading across the fissures and sky distortions. The shadow beast halted, sinking slowly back into the ground, its glow fading into faint veins of light beneath the surface. The radiant form above folded upward, retreating into the sky, leaving a calm that felt fragile but real. The survivors collapsed, trembling with relief, watching the first signs of quiet air and stable ground in what felt like centuries. As they began to assess the damage and help the civilians, a strange hum returned, fainter but persistent. At first, everyone thought it was residual energy, a lingering echo of the fight. But then, faint lights flickered along the horizon. Not from the fissures, not from the sky. Small, fast-moving shapes, too regular to be random, approached the base. The explorers raised their scanners. The readings made their blood run cold. These weren't natural phenomena. They weren't any known species. The ancient forces might have been contained, but humanity had only survived the first awakening. Somewhere, something else had noticed the chaos. And now, it was coming. The survivors watched the approaching shapes carefully, their fear tempered by exhaustion. The explorers quickly realized that these weren't hostile, they moved with purpose, circling the fissures and the remaining glow from the underground containment. Scanners identified them as autonomous drones, ancient machines left by the civilizations that had once studied the forces below and above. Somehow, the old systems had reactivated, responding to the same signals the humans had triggered. Relief rippled through the group, tempered by the knowledge that their presence had drawn attention from things far older and more powerful than they were. The civilians, once terrified, now stood in awe, realizing the world they had stepped into was bigger and stranger than any history they had been told. The tunnels they had explored were sealed behind them, the pillars of light fading as the underground beast settled back into hibernation. The messages scrawled centuries ago made sense at last. Containment, miscalculation, and reactivation were not just warnings, they were instructions for the future. Humanity had been given another chance, but it was clear that curiosity would always carry risk. Over the next hours, the explorers coordinated with the drones to stabilize the area. Sensors were realigned, fissures mapped, and energy readings normalized. The sky, once rippling with distortions, cleared slowly, leaving a calm that felt almost miraculous. The radiant entity above had retreated fully, its presence lingering as a faint glow in the upper atmosphere. The explorers noted that the pulse they had felt for days had settled into a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat finally returning to rest. As calm returned, the team gathered around the main terminal. They reviewed the logs from the old civilization, comparing them to the new events. Every unanswered question they had about the heartbeat, the fissures, and the ancient warning messages was now connected. The forces were not just random beasts or cosmic watchers. They were guardians, meant to balance each other and the land. Humanity had interrupted that balance, but through careful observation, quick thinking, and courage, they had restored it. The lesson was clear. Ambition without understanding could be dangerous, but wisdom combined with humility could prevent catastrophe. The civilians shared their experiences of the tunnels and the sealed gates. The explorers documented every detail, knowing the information would help future generations avoid repeating past mistakes. Together, they worked to mark boundaries, restore communication links, and ensure that the next awakening, should it ever occur, would not catch humanity unprepared. There was a sense of unity now, a feeling that despite fear and uncertainty, they were capable of learning and surviving together. As night fell over the plains, the survivors looked up at the stars, reflecting on how small humanity seemed in the vastness of time and space, and yet how vital their role had been. The pulse beneath the ground was quieter now, steady and calm. The sky above glimmered faintly, a reminder of what had been held at bay. Humanity had woken, they had faltered, and now they had endured. And somewhere beyond the horizon, faint signals echoed, silent, waiting. The lesson remained. Vigilance and respect for the unknown would be humanity's greatest allies in the years to come. For now, the land rested, the forces slept, and humanity had another chance to explore, learn, and grow wiser, stronger, and more aware of the mysteries that had always watched them.